think about the Bible is a guide for our life. It helps us make decisions in our daily life on what we need to do. But it also tells us the things that we should not do. It helps teaches us how we can better ourselves and what examples and things that we need to follow. But the most important thing it does, it guides us on the road to everlasting life. It helps us to make decisions so that we can gain entrance into the new world. One thing it does, it tells us that we definitely have to gain entrance into the new world, and that is love. We know that love is Jehovah's foremost quality. It is his chief attribute. Everything that he does is based on love. And so we're taught the same thing. Let's see how Jesus helped us with this in our theme scripture, John the 13th chapter. And we will read 34 and 35. That's John 13. And we'll read 34 and 35. And this is Jesus here talking. He says, I am giving you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples if you have love among yourselves. Now, as we look at this scripture and we analyze this, Jesus says, I'm giving you a new suggestion, a new principle, a new thought. No. He says, I'm giving you a new commandment. What made this commandment new? We know, according to the Mosaic law, you were supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. But Jesus added to this. Again, let's look at and see his words. He says, I am commanding you that you love one another. How? Just as I have loved you. We know Jesus went so far as to give his life for everyone that wants that opportunity to gain entrance into the new world. What greater act of love could anyone give than sacrificing their life, a perfect life, a person that did nothing wrong, but he sacrificed his life for each and every one of us so that we will have opportunity to gain entrance into the new world. Again, let's go back to the scriptures and look at verse 35. And it says, by this, speaking about the love, all will know that you are my disciples. If we don't have it, we can't be identified as Jesus' disciples. And again, who does he say that we have? Who has to know this? He says, by this, all. All will know that you have that identifying mark. It has to be just as clear as the name we have, because our names identify us as to who we are. That's how very clear that we have to show this love to. So it doesn't mean just the people in this room that we have to have this love for, and who has to know that we have that identifying mark. Not just the people that we live with need that. But it says all. Our workmates, schoolmates, all will know if we have this identifying mark. So what does that tell us? It tells us that for us, love has to be the foremost quality in us as well. We have to make sure that we're displaying that love to have that identifying mark, because if we don't, we cannot gain entrance into the new world. And that's what we're all striving for. We are striving to get to the new world. But right now, we still want to be identified as one of Christ's disciples. And it shows that we have to have that love. It's no doubt about it. It said it was a command. Let's see again how this is brought out for us at 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. And we're going to read verse 13. That's 1 Corinthians 13. And we're going to read verse 13. It says, now, however, these three remain: faith, hope, love. But the greatest of these is love. We know how strong our faith has to be to make it through this system. We know how deep our hope has to be in the promises that are laid out for us in the Bible. But what did he say was the greatest? Love. It shows that it is the foremost quality that each and every one of us need to have. Again, let's help with the scriptures. Let's turn over to Romans, the 13th chapter. And we're going to read verse 8. Romans 13:8. It says, do not owe anything to anyone except to love one another. For whoever loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. You see, it's what I owe you, what you owe me. It's what each and every one of us owe each other. Love. And it has to be an identifying mark, just as the name that we have. It has to be displayed. We don't have a choice, because it's a command that we have to love. Now, at times, some confuse love with perfection. Because nowhere in the Bible does it say that perfection is an identifying mark of true Christians. Because we know that's an impossible task. We cannot be perfect. We cannot display this perfectly at all times. But what it says is we have to put forth the effort to do it. Because we know throughout the Bible, it tells us how many fell short, how many didn't display love. But it shows us how Jesus handled these. We're going to look at some of the examples of the apostles. First, let's turn to Matthew, the 20th chapter. And see, we know that Jesus, when choosing the apostles, he spent a full night in prayer to his Father to make sure that he was making the right choice. Because he wanted to be sure that he had spiritual men. But let's see. We're going to talk about some of the examples that they have where love was not shown, but we see how it was handled. Let's start at verse 20, and we'll read 20 and 21. It says, then the mother of Zebedee approached him, being Jesus, with her son, doing obeisance and asking for something from him. He said to her, what do you want? She replied to him, give the word that these two of my sons of mine may sit down, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. Now, Jesus spent a night praying. And these two adult, supposedly spiritual men, they go to their mother and have their mother ask Jesus for a special privilege. Can you imagine that? How would you have felt if you'd been standing there? Well, let's see how the other 10 apostles felt. In verse 24, it says, when the 10 others heard about it, they became indignant at the two brothers. Admittedly, had I been there, I would have felt the exact same way. But there was only one person who had the right to feel that way, and that was Jesus Christ. None of them had any room to be indignant. But let's see how Jesus handled this. Look back in verse 23. He said to them, you will indeed drink my cup, but to sit down at my right hand and at my left is not mine to give, but it belongs to those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. See, he could have angrily berated them. He could have said, well, we'll get 2 replacements for these. But he didn't do that. He lovingly explained this to him, to those two brothers. He explained it in a way that they could still keep their dignity. That's what true love does. And let's see how he corrected all 10 of them. Let's start at verse 25. It says, but Jesus called them to him because he knew that they were upset and said, you know that the rulers of the nations lord it over them, and the great men wield authority over them. This must not be the way among you. But whoever wants to become great among you must be your minister. And whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister and to give his life as a ransom in exchange for many. See, Jesus said, we have to look at things differently. Because he knew that the Jewish system, they promoted positions, power. They wanted these things for themselves, these great things that they wanted. But Jesus said, that's not the way for us. That's the way those who don't have that mark do. They don't have the mark. We do. We have to do it. We have to display this love. See how lovingly Jesus handled those ones? But Is that the last mistake that they made? Was these the only ones? Again, let's look at Apostle Peter at Matthew, the 26th chapter. Now, we all appreciate the Apostle Peter because of how bold he was with his statements and spirituality, and he was very zealous. But Jesus at this time was letting them know that he was about to die and that they would all eventually be stumbled. But let's look and see how Jesus responds to this in verse 36 of chapter 26 of Matthew. Verse 33. It says, "But Peter in response said to him, although all the others have stumbled in connection with you, I will never be stumbled." Now see, this is the same man that was indignant just a little while ago for someone else wanting this. He said, no, all 11 of them over there, they'll be stumbled. Not me. Not me. What did Jesus tell him? He says, before a cock crows 3 times, you will disown me. Peter did not think it to be so. Let's look at verse 75. I'm still in Matthew 26. Now this is after Peter had denied him 3 times. He says, and Peter called to mind that Jesus said, namely, before a rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. Did Jesus say, told you so? See, you should feel bad. You should be crying in that corner. It's not how Jesus reacted. Did Jesus find a replacement for him? Absolutely not. Was this the last mistake that Peter made? That is why it is love as the identifying mark, not perfection, because it's impossible. Jesus continued to use Peter in a very prominent way, gave him the keys to the kingdom and all these other privileges that he had despite the mistakes he made. Now, we have looked at Jesus' example and how he handled those. What about like us on a personal level? What happens when 2 people, just the 2 of us, we don't see eye to eye? We have an example of that in the scriptures as well. Let's turn over to Acts, the 15th chapter. And we'll read 36 through 40. That's Acts 15. We're going to read 36 through 40. And these are 2 other apostles, very spiritual men. It says, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now return and visit the brothers in every one of the cities where we proclaim the word of Jehovah, to see how they are doing. Barnabas was determined to take along John, who was also called Mark. Paul, however, was not in favor of taking him along with them, saying that he had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. At this, there was a sharp burst of anger, so that they separated from each other. And Barnabas took Mark along and sailed away to Cyprus. Paul selected Silas and departed after he had been entrusted by the brothers to the undeserved kindness of Jehovah. Leave your Bibles open. So the sharp burst of anger. Has that ever happened? Of course. Now I said that these 2, again, are apostles, very spiritual men, who had a very heated disagreement. Now, could you imagine when Barnabas got to his destination, he pulled the brothers to the side. He said, you know that Paul, he can write all those good letters, but he can't do anything about forgiveness. He didn't want to take John along. He didn't want to take John Mark along because he wasn't able to finish this assignment with us last time. How stubborn. Or could you imagine Paul when he got to his assignment? Said, you can't even reason with that Barnabas. His head is so hard you can't do anything with it. Now, the account doesn't say if those conversations took place. But how can we reason from the scriptures to say that it was unlikely that those things happened? Look at verse 41. It says, he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the congregations. Saying negative things about a fellow brother